What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and for those that have seen my realistic Pokemon team video, they may know that a lot of the Pokemon I have there are kind of based on my favorite animals. Granted, since I have mentioned how I like penguins and elephants as my favorite animals, but of course, one animal that I tend to be linked with, more often than not, are cats. Namely because when I was 5 years old, my first pet was a brown cat that I named Chestnut, due to its chestnut brown fur. And while sadly enough he was given back to the person who gave him to our family by my mother, due to her finding cats to be sneaky and not trusting them, I still love cats to this day. And more often than not, I tend to get drawn to a video game franchise if it has a cat in it. Which really does kind of make me wonder what my favorite cats are. And more often than not, I decided to make this list. So, it's time to count down my top 10 favorite cats in video games. That being said, one per franchise, and more often than not, if they're a cat, they're on this list. But first, coast is clear. So, without further ado, let's get started. Starting off first at number 10, we have Jibanyan from Yokai Watch. Oh boy, here's a little bit of a deep cut. Yokai Watch really does say a lot, but sometimes around the mid 2010s, a lot of game franchises where Pokemon was starting to basically lose traction, and in fact, it was getting to a point that a lot of people were starting to create games that, more often than not, capture on Pokemon's popularity. And while we do have games like Cassette Beast, Power World, and even the upcoming and recently revealed Pikmin, well, back in the mid-2010s, it was Yokai Watch that was touted as the Pokemon killer, which really did say a lot. However, it had a lot to be said once you realize a lot of the yokai from Yokai Watch are actually pretty solid. And as you had fan favorites like Komasan, Blaziria, and Wallkappa. But of course, the biggest just so happened to be the mascot, Jibanyan. And it's fitting when you think about it, as basically Jibanyan being a mascot of Yokai Watch kind of serves as a foil to Pikachu, due to the whole cats hunting mice, the whole thing about cats hunting mice. So it kind of makes some sense. And it even says a lot once you realize Jibanyan's main element is fire. But that being said, when you first meet Jibanyan, you basically see him just around a crosswalk, basically possessing people to walk into traffic so he could essentially defeat oncoming traffic, so he can learn to defeat any truck that basically drives through that area, only to basically get run over or hit and knocked out, as an effort to more or less redeem himself in the eyes of his former owner, Amy, who of course, as we soon see in Yokai Watch 2, as it turns out, he used to be her pet cat, Rudy. And he eventually died protecting her from said truck in a crosswalk. Only to basically he die in the process. And the last thing he heard before he faded away was Amy more or less saying that he was so lame. Which honestly really tugs at my heartstrings. Of course, in Yokai Watch 2, you get to see those events play out, and it turns out Amy was the one that was calling herself so lame. But even with that, it was nice to clear the air there. But that being said, after befriending Nate, Jibanyan eventually, and especially after getting back a trinket that reminded him of Amy from Rothrath, well, he eventually became Nate's main partner alongside Whisper. And basically, he's a solid partner no matter what. Especially with his signature Sultimate move, Paws of Fury. And even with that, in the future, in the following games, he got some more buffs to it, which kind of mirrors Pikachu and its popularity in the Pokemon franchise. But even with that, there's still a lot of other fusions to it. There are a lot of things to it. I mean, you got his fusions, as he can essentially fuse with Koth to become the Thorny Thornyon, or the aforementioned Rothrath to become Batinyon. And let's not forget all the other variants out there, from Robanyon, Goldenyon, the Gemnyons, Hovernyon, the Fruitnyons, Darknyon, Sailor Nyon. I mean, even Shogunyon, the legendary Shogunyon, which, again, seem to mimic the Pika clones. Honestly, in all fairness, the fact that Jibanyan is more or less limited to a game that has been from a company that has since gone out of business, yeah, that's why it's this low on the list. But even with that, he's still a popular character. And it would be interesting to see him in Smash. Especially considering his interaction with Pikachu. It really does say a lot. Moving on next at number 9, we have the Palicos from the Monster Hunter franchise. Oh boy. Alright. I have not played a lot of Monster Hunter. In fact, when it comes down to it, my first Monster Hunter game has been Ultimate Monster Hunter 4, or Monster Hunter 4 for the Nintendo 3DS. But with the most recent Monster Hunter game I've played being Monster Hunter Rise for the Switch. But even with that, more often than not, and I've had an interest. I've seen a lot of things involving the felines, or phalanxes, as more often than not, I've come across them just walking around and just minding their own business. And honestly, they're kind of fierce little warriors. So it kind of makes sense that eventually Palicos would become playable, or at least partners with the hunter themselves. And honestly, kind of makes for a nice little pairing, as the Palicos serve as kind of a partner to the hunter, and a nice little foil as well. Granted, that being said, I really do love the Palico chefs, or the feline chefs from Monster Hunter Rise, because they're just so awesome. But honestly, if I had to say it, Palicos more often than not serve as kind of apprentice knights. And in terms of Monster Hunter Rise, it's nice to see them essentially teaming up with the dog-like Palamutes as kind of to the point that it seems like they're putting aside the whole animosity between cats and dogs. Yeah, there's not that much involving the Palicos, but since I only played 2 Monster Hunter games. But honestly, from what I played, I enjoy the Palicos for the way they are. That's all I gotta say. Moving on next at number 8, we have Yuumi from League of Legends. Yeah. When it comes down to it, if you have a witch, a warlock, or a spellcaster, you always know that they're going to have some form of familiar. Whether it's an owl like Merlin from Sword into Stone, or heck, a demon familiar, or a demon or shadow familiar, or like, I guess arguably enough, Sebastian from Black Butler. But when it comes down to it, you're always going to know that there's gotta be some form of familiar who's basically a cat, if not a cat themselves. I mean, granted, you do have like Crookshanks from the Harry Potter franchise, Hermione's cat Crookshanks from the Harry Potter franchise, but you do have, but then again, in these sorts of cases, I'm talking about characters like Salem Saberhagen from Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Tikal from DC Comics, or even Rouge from Black Clover. And in all fairness, the fact that Yuumi from League of Legends was introduced as the familiar of a Yordle sorcerer named Nora, who more or less decided to venture off on her own when her master went missing, is one of the most amazing and adorable champions I've ever seen. Granted, not the most, that's still Lulu by a long shot. But even with that, Yuumi more often than not is just your standard cat. And the fact that her main passive, if you and me, basically just attaches herself to another champion, giving her healing and shields, but also passing the healing on to her ally, is a perfect way to keep allied champions alive. She has a heal. She has another attack that basically heals her and stores heals that she can give to her allies. She fires an erratic missile at an opponent called Pouncing Projectile that basically slows down and staggers opponents. She has a skill called Zoomies, which anyone who has a cat knows how they easily get the Zoomies. And yeah, movement speed. And her ultimate just allows her to release waves of magic enemy from the book that she rides. Plus, more often than not, she acts like a cat to the point that she's afraid of water, she hates both Twitch and Rengar, and she spends her time napping. Honestly, the fact that Nora is slated to be a new champion, it makes me like Yumi even more. That's all I gotta say. This will be continued in part 2.